Anime has never been new to me. In fact, you could say that it runs in the family even though I'm genetically American. This is probably due to the strange occurrence that before I was born, my grandfather, uncle, and dad all went on proselyting missions to Japan to spread the name of Jesus Christ. With that said, it should be obvious that I had a very Christian upbringing, and so I didn't really grow up on anime. Sure, I watched Dragon Ball Z and Yu-Gi-Oh! On early Saturday mornings, and I have memories of my older sisters using the family computer to watch Oren High School Host Club, but even then my exposure didn't really go any further than the works of Studio Ghibli, My Neighbor Totoro, Ponyo, Castle in the Sky, basically anything and everything that I could find at the local library. To this day, my most viewed of Miyazaki's works is Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, simply because it's the one movie my family physically owned. But it wasn't until early high school that my exploits into anime really began. Using the old Kindle Fire that I had bought for my mom for $50, I sat down in the school library, and using the public Wi-Fi, I watched Log Horizon on YouTube. Embarrassing as it is, I didn't know about streaming services like Crunchyroll, mostly due to my crippling inability to talk to people. In other words, I never joined the anime club because the upperclassmen scared me. Once they were gone, also known as my junior year of high school, I joined the anime club. And my anime club was weird. It had maybe 5 members who never talked about anime outside of the club. The projector would play exactly 2 episodes of anime, and then everyone would wordlessly leave. Additionally, we had the strange tradition that on the last week before Christmas break, we watched the out-of-context clip of the Bleeding Bread. Now I, still in my shonen phase, saw this loaf of over-emotional bread and said, "Wow, that looks pretty cool," and then promptly forgot about it. Eventually, I graduated. I upgraded from a Kindle Fire to my own personal laptop, and as Christmas approached, I remembered a loaf of bleeding bread. I took to the internet and found that the clip came from an anime called Humanity Has Declined. I watched it in one sitting. It was good. It made me laugh, and before I knew it, the wacky, unpredictable story threads and dry sarcastic humor had come to an end. But I didn't really get it. I mean, I was pretty sure it was about society. Maybe. You know, watching it in one sitting was probably not the best idea. Welcome to Labra Stories. I'm going to be spoiling Humanity Has Declined, which is a happy anime about the end of the world. Humanity Has Declined is a weird anime. It aired in the summer of 2012 and is currently ranked as the 13th highest score of animes that aired that season. And that is not an easy spot to claim among the likes of Hyoka, Space Brothers, Yuri Yuri, the end of Hunter x Hunter's Heaven Arena arc, the finale of Sket Dance. Sometimes you wonder if anime was better in the past, but then you also remember that this is the season that SAO started airing, and somehow that is the most remarkable event that came out of the season. Now, I'm willing to bet you've at least heard about the Bleeding Bread. I mean, it's only 10 years old, and the clip lends itself to virality so well that... Who am I kidding? Nobody knows what I'm talking about. I think it's reasonable to say that Humanity Has Declined, while notable when it was released, had little staying power in the popular mind of the community. Perhaps as a consequence of this, there are no official translations of the original light novels, nor is there a complete fan translation. Which is disappointing because I wanted to read the source materials not only in preparation for this video, but also in the pursuit of answers. Specifically, I wanted to know how the story ended, not just to figure out what happened, but to get closure. Like I mentioned on my first watch of the anime, I didn't understand what the show was supposed to be about, or what it was trying to say. I also felt that rewatching the series may not be the best idea because I didn't have the feeling that the anime really got to making its point. As such, I thought that by reading the light novels and finding out how the story ended, I could figure out what it was about. But I don't read Japanese, so that is not an option for me, or at least not an option that I'm willing to do the necessary work for. So, I rewatched the anime. They say that when you reread a book, or in this case, rewatch an anime, you learn something new. This principle is generally true, but a more precise definition is that a work of media will show new sides of itself when you change your mindset. Children enjoy rewatching the same episode of Blue's Clues or Sesame Street ad nauseum because on repeated iterations, they can anticipate what is coming and prove to themselves that they have solved the puzzle and learned something. However, this learning only comes because the child had a new mindset. Rather than just watching Big Bird try to solve the problem, the child wants to help the yellow puppet. Parallel to this, in my rewatch of Humanity Has Declined, I had a very different mindset than the naive boy that couldn't see Evangelion for anything more than its big robots. Rather, when I rewatched Humanity Has Declined, I was not feeling right. At the beginning of this year, I moved out of my parents' house. It has been quite the experience. Now I have to pay rent, and so I got a job. I no longer work my schedule around Japanese broadcasts of seasonal anime and instead have to conform to a schedule that is made by a corporate official that has worked for the company for less time than I have. Fantastic. Another new thing that happened with pretending to be a functional member of society is my increasing awareness of the world. Global warming, the economy being stretched thin, China planning world domination, algorithms, AI, politics. The universe is big, I am small, I live somewhere insignificant, doing something insignificant, and at the end of it all, I will die. I feel this swelling fear and impossible void expand within me, and then suddenly, nothing. Not even that strange void remains, rather it seems to have collapsed into itself, leaving an absence of absence. Pure nothing. To me, this is what it feels like to experience an existential crisis. It happened 2 weeks ago, and immediately following it, I rewatched Humanity's Decline seeking some sort of answer or explanation, an insight into myself and what I should do about the inevitable end of my life. And yet, within minutes, I found it hard to keep this mindset as I was swept up in whims of fancy and disillusionment, all because Humanity's Declined is a happy anime. Bright pastel colors, fairies with their endlessly smiling faces, an OST composed of light whimsical music that is reminiscent of frolicking through tall grass or just sitting back and looking at beautiful mountains. The world is free of disease, wild animals, and war. The greatest concern for the remaining humans is finding enough food to live, but even then, nobody fights over getting a meal. Nobody starves. The main character, Watashi, or as I'm going to call them, Mediator, because none of the characters in the show have a real name, and it's the first thing that anyone calls her, and I'm not going to bother getting confused by referring to myself rather than the character. We all on the same page? Where was I? Right. Mediator works as a liaison between the remaining humans and the illogical fairies, hence the name. However, this job, much like several other government positions, is neither hard nor important. Mediator does not try to understand the fairies, nor does she try to convince them to save the lives of the remaining humans. Instead, Mediator simply interacts with the fairies, feeding them sweets, engaging in idle chit-chat, and of course, suffering whatever mischief the little jester-wearing costume devils stir up. The fairies themselves possess incredibly advanced technology, which basically boils down to being able to do whatever they want. For example, the creation of megalomaniac chickens that attempt to take over the economy, a manga that traps the reader inside of it and then forces them to draw on the panels and tell a story, a banana that traps Mediator in a time loop, a giant nautilus made out of what I'm pretty sure is humans that have devolved into slimes. The list goes on. However, despite how turbulent these events are, Mediator views these exploits as simple annoyances. In fact, she views most troubles as simple annoyances. The world of Humanity's Declined seems like a utopia, but there is a looming shadow that hangs over everything. The undeniable truth that humanity has declined. The population is down, food supplies are slowly dwindling, technology has been lost, and every country has disappeared. That is not a simple annoyance. That is not something that can be ignored, and yet nobody seems to care. In Episode 5, Mediator is introduced to the Human Monument Project, a massive endeavor to take all of human history, their technology, accomplishments, cultural values, their inevitable decline, and put it all in one place as if to say we were here. This is who we were. But the project doesn't go anywhere. In Episode 3, Y, the letter, not the question, yes, that's what they're called in the anime, Y says that nobody works on the project unless there is nothing else to do. Nobody cares about the Human Monument Project. Sure, they say they do. A large part of Episode 5 involves a massive party the villagers throw to celebrate the launch of the Endeavor, although that celebration is less for the project and more so because the villagers got their hand on a working generator. One episode later, Mediator destroys the generator because its existence indirectly harms the fairies, and, as expected, all work on the project slows to a crawl just days after the vigor that it started with. But humanity has declined. It is falling and will continue to do so until it ends, much like how the anime. Anime is really weird. Such a statement should come as a surprise to nobody, but this weirdness hit me the hardest one day when I showed my parents an anime. I live close enough that we meet once a week for some evening activities, but since my dad is a software engineer, my mom is an English major, and I am a weeb, we don't have a lot of common interests. In order to potentially increase these interests, I convinced them to let me show them some anime. The first anime I showed them was Tanaka-kun is Always Listless. Great anime, very family-friendly, highly recommended. It's a slice of life starring Tanaka-kun, who is always listless. It doesn't get more complicated than that. However, while watching it, my mom asked me why the characters sweat so much. She was talking about these little water droplets, and like the ticking of a clock in the background, I have long grown used to their existence and have kind of learned to ignore them. But now that they had been pointed out, I couldn't help but realize that I didn't actually know how to explain what they meant beyond some sort of emotive mark. Thank goodness I decided against showing them Horimiya, as I definitely would have been able to explain the significance of the cat's rainbow spread of hair colors. But anime gets weirder. On another day, I showed my parents their fourth anime, Made in Abyss. Great anime, very family-friendly, highly recommended. My parents enjoyed it, but inevitably the show ended. It is quite likely that my parents will never watch the movie, watch season 2, or even read the manga. For my parents, Made in Abyss is over. Of course, this is a fate that every fan of anime is subject to, simply because of the format of anime. It airs on TV 1 episode per week. Most of the time, the studio hasn't even finished all the episodes when the first one airs, and after 12 opportunities to grace the box of the television, the majority of anime ends. Rarely do we see a show come to a great conclusion like Code Geass until it was ruined by the following movie, or a long-running series like One Piece, which, I'm not even sure if that's ever going to end. Instead, most anime is served the same fate as No Game No Life, always stuck on season 1 with no hope of continuation. Whether the viewers wanted it or whether the story was remotely ready, the anime ends. But then, just read the manga. The story continues there as the author intended it, continuing until it ends. Except, it doesn't. Manga is just the same as anime, coming out piece by piece, although the Grim Reaper of this medium is somewhat more elusive than the end of a season. In episode 4, Mediator, the usually mute and uncommunicative assistant, and Y get trapped in a fairy's manga. In order to get out, they must either create a story on the manga's panels and bring it to a proper conclusion, or get cancelled. The trio isn't sure what will happen if their manga is cancelled, but given that the fairies have trapped them there, they are sure the consequences will be less than savory, and so they set out to create a story. However, the threat of cancellation always looms over their heads, and due to wise mismanagement of the plot, it inevitably comes for them. The uncaring axe falls, the manga is cancelled. The end. This concept of the end is pervasive throughout Humanity Has Declined, even if it is easy to forget among the comedy, outrageous hijinks, and soothing atmosphere that constantly distracts from that inevitability. In episode 2, Mediator and Assistant investigate a factory that has been taken over by sentient capitalist chickens who, in taking over the means of production, plan to take over the world. However, at the end of the day, they are just chickens, and so they are easily defeated by a boy with a camera that sounds like a gun. The end. In episode 4, the fairies manga is cancelled. The end. In episode 6, the deep space probes... You know what? I'll actually talk about them later. After the opening theme finishes, Humanity Has Declined plays a title card with the current arc's title and either the words Episode 1 or Episode 2. You see, rather than being a 12-episode anime, Humanity Has Declined is a collection of 5 2-episode stories and 2 1-episode stories. However, other than having recurring characters, the same setting, and the same world building, none of these short stories have anything to do with each other. In episode 1, Mediator's hair becomes sentient, and yet this plays no role in any other episode. Episode 5 brings up the Human Monument Project, but other than a single mention in episode 3, such a prodigious quest is never brought up again. After any arc ends, it really does. This constant ending makes Humanity Has Declined rare. Most television shows, be they anime, cartoons, or live action, are either serial or episodic. Now, by episodic, I don't mean that it comes out in episodes, but rather that each part is completely separate from the previous. In an episodic series, previous events may occasionally be referenced, but the characters remain the same. Time is meaningless, and when the screen fades to black, everything resets. Serial, on the other hand, is a format where one part does lead to the next, building a greater story beyond itself. Each series of events is important, moving from 1 to 2, leading to 3, the beginning before the end, the cereal before the milk. Just about every anime is serial, however, Humanity Has Declined truly is one of a few episodic anime. Each arc stands separate from the previous and the next. If separated and viewed on their own, they would all make just as much sense, save for a few jokes or minor details. Because of this, there's not really an important order of events, and so naturally it isn't told in chronological order. The episodes, if put chronologically, would go 11, 12, 10, 7, 8, 9, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, when this happens, it's usually because the author has some intention behind it. Maybe the episodes have been put in thematic order, like the Garden of Sinners, or they're being used to create mystery and force the audience to think and make their own connections, like Boogie Pop. But Humanity Has Declined doesn't do this either. There's no progression of thoughts between the episodes nor a building to some grand conclusion. Simply, the anime's only order is the one we happen to have because it had to air one episode a week and it just ended up the way it is. Any reordering of the anime's arcs would be just as valid. As such, Humanity Has Declined only ends in the sense that its time came to a close, but where it started, the order that it went in, and where it ended do not matter. Therefore, it is episodic. But that doesn't mean you can't derive some meaning from it. Even though each handful of minutes may be separate from the others, each individual arc still illustrates some sort of idea. So, let's go back to these ideas. In Episode 6, the Deep Space Probe Pioneer and Voyager return to Earth. However, they have not found anything. In fact, they have decided that there is nothing to find, that their journey out into the cold void of space will be infinite, and all along the way, they will be alone. That their purpose to spread the message that humans are alive, intelligent, and ready to reach out to other civilizations is not something that they can achieve, an impossible goal given to something built solely to fulfill it. But if the purpose of Pioneer and Voyager cannot be fulfilled, then do they really have a purpose? In Episode 9, the fairies speedrun the history of man building a civilization capable of genetically crafting plants that can grow any confectionery imaginable, only to then ruin the soil with an infinite number of monuments leading to the collapse of the city. But, since the city was on an isolated island, nobody ever knew that it existed, and now that it is gone entirely, nobody ever will. So, does it really matter that the city was there? These episodes are about nihilism, that in the scope of the universe, everything is insignificant, alone, doomed to be forgotten, and therefore ultimately meaningless. Even if we create a monument to commemorate our existence, nobody will find it. This in part explains why nobody works on the Human Monument Project, but there is another reason for that neglect. In creating this monument, the villagers would have to accept their fate that they will fade away, something that makes humans very uncomfortable. Take, for example, the afterlife. Since seemingly forever, humans have believed that there is something that comes after death. But how can something come after what is literally the end? In everyday life, we see things start and end all the time. A breath, a video, a story, a life. These things do not continue after their end. They simply exist for a time before disappearing, and yet we have seemingly always had this thought that we are a special exception. That death, rather than being the end, is but another step in our existence. But then, what comes after death? Do we exist afterwards for some time, only to eventually end? Or is that end just another step for some other end that may just be another step? The afterlife is rather inconclusive about resolving itself, but it gets even weirder because the afterlife is impossible to prove without dying. Surprisingly, nobody seems too inclined to prove the concept's validity because even though the afterlife is meant to make death more bearable, that doesn't mean it doesn't still scare us. Death still triggers our animalistic fight or flight response, and so naturally we run away from it. We run from the end. I mean, are we supposed to fight the end? How would anyone even go about that? Would we fight in the hope that it could be conquered, or with the full knowledge that our attempts were futile? That when our flailing limbs and crying voice fade away, all that is left to signify our existence is the stain of blood that our corpses lie atop of. But this has no purpose. In fighting death, we would accomplish nothing. And so, we run, and run, and run. Only when we cannot run any longer do we stop, and remember why we were running, and so we start running again. But why? Really, why are we running from death if it is only going to inevitably catch up with us? Is there some greater purpose to it all? In Episode 1, Mediator comes across a loaf of bread. The bread explains that in the current day and age, bread can be made out of anything, even garbage. On that lovely note, the bread then declares that it is time to eat the bread and proceeds to rip itself in two. The bleeding bread screams, "Please eat me, please fulfill me, please make it so that I do not die without purpose." Now, the purpose of bread is simple, to be eaten. But what is the purpose of a human? Is it even something we can accomplish, or are we, like Pioneer and Voyager, doomed with an impossible task? Worse, or maybe just as bad, do we have no purpose? During my rewatch, I got the feeling that the humans left after humanity declined had lost their purpose. Even though I didn't know what that was, I was at least certain that they were not on the right path. They no longer sought to rebuild society, to progress humanity. Instead, they just existed as they pleased, repeatedly refining a wall of guns, rebooting the manga industry, or making sweets day after day. The villagers did as they pleased, hoping to live just another week, month, or year, but it doesn't seem like they were interested in living another generation. To me, it seemed wrong that the villagers no longer wanted to return to their former glory, or even a small imitation of it. Part of me yelled at my screen, "This isn't what was supposed to happen. We were supposed to explore the stars. You can't do this. You're going to disappear. You're going to..." But maybe I'm missing something. After all, humans are not built to live forever. Nothing is built to last forever. An anime will start and end, a loaf of bread will be baked and eaten, and we have been born and will die. Everything is subject to this, but that doesn't mean it is devoid of purpose because bread can be eaten. To suppose that because humans will fade away and as a result they have no purpose means that I must also conclude that a loaf of bread is not made to be eaten just because it will eventually cease to exist, even if it did so because it was eaten. That is not something I am willing to accept. That is not something I can accept. Bread has a purpose because the people that make it give it a purpose. Voyager and Pioneer have purpose because even though it can never be fulfilled, they were built for that purpose. Humans have purpose because they were born by humans who were born by monkeys who over millions of years of evolution were born by single-celled, probably non-sentient life that was made by, in all eventuality, the Big Bang, which was made by... I have made a logical error. A loaf of bread is made to be eaten, but it only has that purpose because we have defined it as food. As a better example, a rock could have the purpose of being a building block for a suburban house, a decoration for that house, or even a tool to break into that house. The rock's purpose depends on its interpretation of use, however, the rock is inanimate and cannot choose for itself how it will be used. Its purpose is defined by something beyond itself, in this case, a human. But this argument is still too broad. The purpose of a rock changes based on who is defining it. The person building the house, the person living in the house, and the person breaking into the house all have different ideas of what the rock's purpose is. But then, what about people? Are they defined by whatever use other people assign to them? Do other people define my purpose? Am I just a wage slave for a one-star company? Am I just a consumer of Japanese broadcasts? I don't have Asian parents, but I'm pretty confident in saying that the answer to that question is no. I should not become a doctor just because my parents decided I should be one. I get to decide what I want to do, which apparently is making videos. This is where my misunderstanding of the villagers stemmed from. I thought that humans had some greater purpose that was prescribed by something beyond themselves, be it society or some source of divinity, but in the end, the only person that can determine their purpose is themselves. In episode 8, Assistant goes on a journey to discover who he is, and in episode 11 and 12, Mediator tries to find the mythical fairy's tea party before she graduates from school. These pursuits are entirely selfish, and yet they mean everything. Mediator goes on a journey knowing that it will someday end, probably before she is successful. However, neither of these things is important. To illustrate, Humanity's Decline goes from start to finish, episode 1 to episode 12. But nobody cares about that beyond the fact that start and finish define its length. What we care about is what happens in between those 2 points. What happens arc by arc, one at a time, with little regard to the fact that the inevitable end will come. Because why fight something that we cannot conquer? Why not take the time that we have been granted before that end and just do something? Therefore, it makes sense that the villagers spend their days pursuing whatever simple desires they want, because they know that when we are gone, we are gone. Nobody will remember us, we will have no effect, and we will... No, I wasn't wrong. Something is off about the villagers. I tried to ignore this. I tried to make my point without bringing it up, but I just can't. I'm going to spoil the ending of Humanity Has Declined. Not for the anime, but for the light novels, the source material. And I'm sorry if this bugs you, but there really isn't any getting around this. There is no timestamp for when it will be safe to come back. While I was unable to find the translated light novels, that doesn't mean I couldn't find spoilers. In the final light novel, it is established that every presumed human character is actually a fairy, save for Assistant. In retrospect, the foreshadowing of this is done so well that it seems impossible for it to be any other way. It explains why the Human Monument Project never moves forwards because the fairies are uninterested in the past. In episode 10, the fairies build a metropolis in a single day and it then falls in a single day. But the fairies hold both the creation and the destruction as null. They don't care about anything that has happened and they don't care about what will happen. Instead, they chase fads, paying attention only to whatever happens to hold their attention in the moment and then moving on once that is no longer fun. This is why the arcs in Humanity Has Declined never influence one another. It's a story told by a fairy, a being that believes that what's done is done and never to be brought up again. But this is not how humans operate. I do not fear death just because it marks my end, but also because I fear that I am unremarkable. I want to have some sort of impact on the world. That's why I make these videos, so that I can be remembered, so that when my arc ends, it can affect the next one, leading to a cascade of dominoes over generations. It is not that I am defined by those around me, but that in defining for myself what I should be, I contribute to the pool of ideas that constitutes society. This is human nature. This is why Assistant is the only character that has a camera, a device that can store memories and show where he has gone and what he has done. Even if nobody sees it, he makes that record because to him it is important that he makes his own little human monument. I agree that we should run from the end. There isn't anything we can do to stop it, although we can still run and prolong its coming. I agree that we should live one day at a time, going on our own adventures, however ambitious or obscure they may be. But I do not agree that we should disregard the effect that our lives will have afterwards. History matters. We run from the end, but we are not alone in that journey. At the end of it, we pass on a baton to the next generation. We learn from the experience of our ancestors, and we should strive to make sure that whoever comes next can learn from us. After all, if we're going to die, is there anything more important than making sure that there is something we leave behind, rather than truly disappearing? Humanity Has Declined is one of my favorite anime. When I decided to rewatch it, I was feeling at my lowest, and yet I was refreshed. While it may not appear so at first glance, Humanity Has Declined is very aware of what I was feeling. It is aware that I will one day end, but that worrying over that is a waste of time. Instead, it embraces that cycle and makes the most of each iteration. In doing so, I am remembered that life is but a cycle of beginnings and ends, one day at a time, slowly building a record, one step at a time. Thank you for watching, and now that this video has reached its end, I hope you start with a slice of your own life.